understand that. So we're going to start out with going to the attendance room and then going through a PowerPoint presentation from the budget team about the budget process, and then we'll come back out here. So we're not adjourning to the attendance room. We're just going to move locations for a little bit and then come back. So I put a motion out there. So first, second, okay. All in favor? Opposed? Okay. I guess we can turn these off now.
Don't spill any coffee on it.
That's a good question.
Well, because they're calling for blow, so.
Yet they have an air conditioning at the same time, so I don't know.
Mr. Town Manager, the meeting is yours.
Maybe it's a first.
Thank you. Thank you for the. I don't know if you can hear me or not. Thank you for the opportunity. Obviously, there have been a lot of concern about the budget format and a lot of questions. So what we decided to do was put together a presentation. Much of this will not be new to Ms. Walsh because the selectmen have been in on some of this, which is why they bought into the new process. But essentially what we wanted to do is let you know how we got to where we are and where we intend to go going forward. To simplify, we will take questions, but we will not take questions about specific departments or specific department heads. And that will be obvious as we begin to get into it. So you can click the first slide. We thought we'd show that what we're doing, we think, builds on what Frank Crimmins started and Joe Feaster continued. It includes hiring professionals. As you know, the police department is now FBI accredited. We have strengthened the accounting practices with Maureen Doherty. We have eliminated illegal procurement procedures. With the internal auditor and the accountant, we have increased financial controls. And in the HR area, especially with Mr. Kelly, we have abolished unfair personnel practices. You can go to the next slide. I neglected to point out the budget teams consisted primarily of myself, Susan Herman, who is the internal auditor, Jamie V., who is the administrative assistant to the Board of Selectmen, and James Kelly, who is HR director. So what we have done in about the time that the last 15 months or so is we have updated the payroll technology. This committee pushed that, it's my understanding, to get a standardized payroll. So we're now using Harper's at both ends of Pearl Street. It's not been problem-free, but it is working. We've established audit, procurement, and HR departments, which we've already talked about. You've got Maureen Doherty in procurement, Susan in audit, and Jamie in HR. We've instituted written procurement policies. We are currently we have reviewed utility billing and are continuing to do so now. The master plan process was commenced by the appropriate boards, Selectmen, the Planning Board, etc. As you know, town meeting adopted the personnel bylaw and policies, which was the key thing we wanted last year. And we're now, we believe, have entered into an era of town and school collaboration, especially on the staff level. In the FY14 budget cycle, which is the budget we're in now, this is my observations primarily as an observer. I know that's redundant, but I really didn't have much of say in what happened with the budget that we're in now. When I got here, Joe Feaster had the budget done. He'd already had meetings with most of the department heads, and the budget was in the hands of the Board of Selectmen. So it consisted of town manager meeting with staff, then Board of Selectmen meeting with staff. You had an annual town meeting that had 80 plus warrants. Your FinCom report totaled roughly 270 pages. Your subcommittees met with staff. They also met with the town manager and staff. The town meeting committees themselves met with the staff, and they also met with the manager and senior management, and then you went to town meeting. This is what we have heard from this committee, that there have been concerns that in the budgeting process at this end of Pearl Street that there have been no priorities. There has been some concern about honesty. There has certainly been a lot of concern regarding accuracy. There have been concerns regarding whether or not certain expenditures are justified. There is a history of little confidence in what is submitted to the FinCom. The FinCom has felt compelled, for good reason, frankly, to redo a lot of the work in order to get a comfort level with it, which means, of course, that there was a belief that there was no reliability. There was a belief that some budgets were padded, that some department heads were hoarding, for want of a better word. Others were overspending, that there was a focus on past practice, that there may in fact be hidden errors, and as the deputy chair of your committees pointed out, the budgets have traditionally been replete with mathematical errors. So you can go to the next. Oh, okay. We believe that when it comes to priorities, we have vision. Yeah, I forgot the other half, didn't I? And that when it comes to honesty, we have ethics. We have a background of ethics. We do have skill. We are planning, and we are professionals. I have a more than 40-year career in government, I hate to say. 33 years at the local level. Jamie is pushing close to 40 years. Susan has probably 20, 25 years. Some of it, frankly, as a member of a FinCom in another community. Susan was, for a number of years, member of the Finance Committee in the town of Needham, and ultimately became staff to the Finance Committee in the town of Needham. So she has a background, and we have the experience. The challenges we faced, we believe, that there was no unified town message. Our budget is not service delivery based. It's not driven by policy. There are no established clear priorities. We have a history of reactive spending versus proactive planning. We have conflicting priorities in the operational versus the capital. It's been an ongoing problem here. Our capital has suffered, especially as times have gotten worse. We have a focus on micromanagement, and I have never worked in a place in a 40-year career that had as many departmental silos as Stoughton has, frankly. And that's part of the problem. But what we've run into, a lot of you have seen Selectman O'Regan wearing a button that says, you know, we shouldn't do it the way we've always done it. That's what we hear from department heads. We've always done it this way. You can go to the next one. But it's our opinion that if, in fact, the town is interested in, number one, good governance, and number two, fiscal responsibility, then it's not working. The way we do it now is not working, which is why we chose to change it. You can go to the next slide. We felt that some of the comments that came from you all had validity. That was an observation that the three of us, and to a certain extent the four of us, Jamie was not really, she was busy doing other things after she first got here, that your concerns were in fact based on fact, not innuendo. And in order to test this, we did a budget exercise with our department heads in November. And in essence, we asked department heads to complete within a 24-hour time span their number of FTEs, who worked for them, how many hours they worked, what accounts they were charged to, what their budget was originally for fiscal year 14, what their adjusted budget was for fiscal 14, what their year-to-date unexpended funds were, and their year-to-date availability, because there's a difference. We wanted to know folks' grade and step, their title, their date of hire, what their actual amount in fiscal year 13 was, what budget adjustments had been made, and what they intended to request in fiscal 15. What we discovered, unfortunately, is that most of our department heads were not able to comply. We had a few who got it, who were able to get it done, but clearly most of them were not able to get it done within the time frame. Some didn't get it done at all. We felt that we had a problem in that it wasn't a capability issue, it was that they probably had not been properly trained to do budgeting at anywhere down the line. Some department heads needed assistance from their staff. We had department heads who frankly didn't know what an FTE was. who didn't know what grades and step were, who had no idea what an adjusted budget was, and had no idea what their year-to-date totals were. So as a result of this exercise, we came to the conclusion as a team that, much like you guys, we had no confidence in what we were getting from department heads. And that we decided, rather than go back to a complete zero-based budgeting, that the four of us would do the budget based upon a zero-based budget. So we took everybody back to zero. You can go. Some of the findings we've also made is that our accounting software is such that collective bargaining agreement settlements and retro amounts are not able to be allocated into the budgets on a line item amount. They're added as a column on the, a row on the bottom. And then they're hit like a slush fund as the raises come in. Our accounting software offers absolutely no assistance for department heads in preparing their budgets. None. Virtually every single department is keeping a shadow budget in Excel, which means they're doing double the work. The other thing we discovered is that while the instructions were we will have 26.1 pay periods for fiscal year 14, several of our departments, including some of our major departments, failed to budget for 26.1 pay periods. They budgeted simply for 26. I believe that was something you guys ultimately caught and corrected. Some departments actually over-appropriated fiscal year 14 salaries. Like I said, we're at this stage of the game, we're not going to identify departments because the goal here is to educate them and move forward rather than move backwards. Other things we found were position titles were overrepresented in budgets. Those position title errors carried over to KVS and the payroll. And when we talk about position titles overrepresented, it's a title for a position that doesn't exist. Like if you are familiar with Monty Python, it would be like we had a minister of silly walks. You know, it's a position that doesn't exist, yet virtually almost every department had positions that didn't exist. They're not found in any collective bargaining agreement. They're not found in the personnel plan. They're not anywhere. Department heads made up positions and moved people into them. As I said, those position title errors carried over into the software. Our payroll vouchers, we discovered, are not accurate. Employee names are not properly assigned to the different pay grades and the job titles. The incorrect payroll vouchers impede budget reconciliation. And as you know, budget reconciliation between the treasurer collector's office and the accountant is something that has to happen every year in order to certify free cash and to come up with a tax rate. And these incorrect vouchers have slowed that process down. We have found some ghost employees. We have found that several departments do not acknowledge personnel turnover, which leads to over budgeting. We have found computational errors, as Pat knows. We found inaccuracies in the FTE. As we have discussed in the past, buyouts are not anticipated or budgeted, so that if an employee leaves and he gets a $10,000 buyout for vacation and or sick time, depending upon which bargaining unit he or she is in, we're stuck not being able to fill that position until the budget catches up with the money they took out the door with them. And virtually every department has been charging to wrong line items. Yes?
Were the ghost employees getting paid?
I think no.
Okay, good.
What they were leading to, and I think it was all part of what you saw on the earlier slide, to over appropriating funds and padding budgets. Nobody did anything wrong. There's no evidence that someone got paid who wasn't here. That's not the issue. The issue is that that's partially what led to over appropriating money. The budget priorities that the Board of Selectmen laid out for me when we began the budget process was they wanted level service funding, not a level funded budget, but level service funding. They did not want to see any cuts in our degree of services. They indicated that we needed to fund mandates, and that was for the most part the only new positions they were willing to look at. We do have some new positions that were mandated. They want to fund capital projects. They want to continue to modernize the technology, and this board has a real emphasis on economic development, which of course develops your tax base and increases your revenue base. My directive to department heads were, again, include your mandates, level service budget. We decided to show outside funding sources, which have traditionally not been shown on the town side. We wanted buyouts budgeted, we wanted vacancies listed, and we wanted to verify FTEs, full-time, part-time, and seasonal. We also required that all new positions would get have my approval required, and the process we set up is that they would be vetted through Mr. Kelly. Mr. Kelly would work with the department head to create a job description, and that job description would come to me for vetting. New positions, we have had a history of not including new positions in our health insurance trust account until the following year. We discussed this when we made the original budget presentation to you. So if we've got, the example I'll use is last year between us and the school, I believe we had 12 new employees. Those 12 new employees could have cost us upwards to $300,000 depending upon what health plan they chose. That was not budgeted. Susan spent a great deal of time verifying names, titles, grades, steps, and hire dates.
Michael, does our consultant not ask for that information when they're building their projections, General Benefits Administration?
I'll let Jamie answer that.
It's not part of their scope of work as it was originally bid.
We can include it, and we'll include it in the future, but
The point of their services.
The problem was when you folks contracted with them originally.
he doesn't mean you folks personally.
I didn't take it personally.
You did not include it in what they were supposed to do. And as you know, a consultant will only do what they're contracted for to do.
And I can say that I worked with this particular consultant in 2 other communities, actually 3 other communities, counting the one in Rhode Island, and they provided that information because that was part of our scope. For whatever reason, when GBS was hired, that was not included in the scope.
Did we get a super price for this cut rate job?
No.
No, you paid the going rate. They're a good firm, but any consultant will only do what you pay them to do. And if you're not going to expand your scope enough to get what you need, you know, they're not going to volunteer it. They're in the business of making money.
Did they ever provide a narrative with their projections to say what was covered and what their the anticipated?
I've not seen one.
I mean, wouldn't you think that a consultant would give you a narrative about what their findings were?
They've given us the findings, and they've come in and done a presentation both to us and to the Insurance Advisory Committee.
Right. But they've not given us an executive summary. Again, I'm assuming if we asked for one, we would get one.
We've asked for one, and we're told it didn't exist.
Okay.
You probably didn't put any scope of work.
I didn't put it, you mean the town didn't?
Right.
Correct.
Right. And we realize you guys had nothing to do with determining the scope of work. That was done in a different time by a different, the people that define the scope of work are no longer even work here.
I don't know that any consultancy group that I would, that I've had worked with in the past has never provided a summary of what they've furnished to you, and what work they've accomplished and what the results were. I've never heard of that.
No, they're not.
That's an editorial.
Right now, we're still using them, yes. And it's time to go out for new quotes.
And I apologize, I digress, but go ahead.
No, that's we also wanted to verify enterprise account allocations, and what that means is, if you'll all recall, you'll see, you know, certain people are split between water, sewer, engineering. They're all over the place. Some are split to trash. We wanted to verify those percentages. Next slide.
Do they add up?
For the most part, yes. Our goals were to develop, and when I say our goals, I mean the 4 members of the budget team, was to develop a total budget. We wanted to illustrate to the taxpayer how the tax dollars were spent. We wanted to eliminate the errors. We acknowledge that the budget has traditionally been full of errors. We wanted to focus on the delivery of services, and we want to educate our department heads for proper budgeting, which needs to be done, and we wanted to include long-range planning in the budget process. So what we did is we developed a modern budget format, which you've seen. I understand that it's not the most popular format in the world, but it was an attempt to do this. We also took the budgets down to 0. And as a budget team, with a great deal of the work actually being done by the internal auditor and the HR director, we matched personnel to titles, one job at a time, one personnel at a time. We verified payroll to personnel action forms, to what was in the budget. Every time there's a change in somebody's status as an employee, there is a personnel action form. That personnel action form is signed off by me, by Mr. Kelly, by the department head, by the internal auditor, town accountant and treasurer, not the internal auditor. It goes to her finally, and she reviews it. But we verified the payroll. We believe we have eliminated the discrepancy in wages. We believe that we have matched the positions to the funding. We have recalculated the FTEs, and we believe that we now have an accurate count on FTEs. We have a good degree of comfort with it. And as I said earlier, we didn't have a comfort with what was submitted before. And we recalculated the salary lines based upon payroll and PAFs, not budget. Then we, like I've indicated, we reclassed the account lines to illustrate how the tax dollars are spent. And that's where we came up with the program versus departmental, program expenses versus departmental purchase of service. Department expenses are utilities and office supplies. Purchase of services are like repairs. Program expenses, for example, would be police patrol supplies, ammunition, that sort of thing. Program purchase services would be, for example, like a collection agency, outside auditing. Like I say, we know this has been controversial, but this was what we were attempting to do, is to take it to a level where it was more understandable on, like Susan indicated, on what it costs to operate the department as opposed to just what it costs to provide the service. Yes?
Where did this format come from?
I'll defer to Susan on that one.
Is this a format that's commonly used in other towns that you know of, or?
It has been used by other towns. It's also a common format in nonprofit. It's a format that can be used.
But not government.
It's called, it's support expenditures and functional expenditures.
Yeah, I've seen it called support and function more so than
And
this.
it's was designed to give the information needed so people would, so the resident would understand how their tax dollars are spent.
The departmental and program designation, you'll see different terms for that in a number of different formats used by other municipalities. But you usually will see expenses versus purchase of services.
Well, why would you need to break those out? They're pretty self-evident. You know, an elevator contract's an elevator contract. I don't need to know that it's a program purchase service. It just one observation.
I think it's kind of, it's something that you see more commonly in cost accounting. It's something you see frequently in the nonprofit sector because they have to account for their quote-unquote administrative expenditures, because a lot of the gifts they get require administrative spending to not go beyond a certain level. For example, if you get a community development block grant, you can't spend more than 15% of it on administration. And typically what I have seen, rather than program versus departmental or purchase, I have seen function versus support more often. But this was the name that everybody was comfortable with, so this is what we went with.
You will also see more and more reporting requirements to people who fund grants, as well as state governments are looking, and the federal government are looking for this type of reporting.
You have a question behind you. I can take it. No, I didn't. You know, sometimes Howard wants you to go through him. So, yes.
So, in your definition, department, you call it function versus support.
Right.
So, function would be the department lines, and the support would be the program lines.
No, it's the exact opposite. Support would be what it takes to fund a department. So it would be office supplies, equipment that's used, for example.
That you could move from one department to another department. Xerox paper, you can move it from one department to another department.
Copying would be a support function. Printing would be a support function.
Versus ammunition, which is for the program, it's for the police department.
Utilities are the bulk in our budget. Utilities are the bulk of the departmental expenses, and that is something
Yeah, I can't hear her.
That won't help.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Hartman. You've said that this is basically a non-profit format used.
Susan said that it's common.
Common for non-profits, all right. So my question would be, if you try to reconcile some of the things that you're doing here with processes that are suggested by the Department of Revenue, there's no reconciliation. So what I want to be sure of is that I'm not closed to new ideas, but this is very difficult to reconcile to what the Department of Revenue, Bureau of Local Services, or any parts of the Department of Revenue suggest regarding certain accounting processes which have to be done. And in turn, those accounting processes have to conform with the Mass General laws. So does this non-profit format conform with the processes recommended by Department of Revenue and in turn the Massachusetts General laws?
Yes, it does. We may not call it what other towns, you will see this format in other towns, maybe not using the same names. You might see support and function instead of what we use, but it's a format that's used in other municipalities, including at least one other municipality in Massachusetts that I've worked in. And it's acceptable to DOR.
What other municipality?
I have worked in, it was what the format we used in Medway, Massachusetts.
It's not just nonprofit, it is a governmental format. And it has been used in a number of different communities.
But not in Massachusetts, just
Yeah.
one.
No, in Massachusetts, there's been some in Massachusetts. The question is whether they use the exact terminology versus synonym.
Yeah, they may have used different titles, but the format's still the same in an attempt to identify those costs that are associated with just funding a department as opposed to that department's mission.
And you will see expenses and purchase of services in very many of the governmental formats.
There wasn't one budget that you have received where the total expenditures have not reconciled to what's in our official documents, with the exception of very few. And as we go through the budget, I can point out one where certain lines have been moved. One is, as an example, departmental community events, which was an expenditure in the police department.
Give her the mic.
Auxiliary.
No singing.
Auxiliary police expenditures have been folded into the police department. So consequently, you're going to see departmental community events in the police salary line for FY13. There was nothing expended or appropriated in FY14, and there's an amount in the budget for FY15. That's one example. There might be 2 examples, but without doubt, a lot of my time was spent ensuring that this would reconcile to our official documents. These are subheadings of our budget. They have no line items. They've been utilized to explain to the taxpayer how the taxpayers' dollars are spent to support and as the taxpayers' program, because it belongs to the residents of the town.
The other thing we changed this year is we went to a joint format as much as we could. There was a joint executive summary that was prepared by myself and the superintendent of schools. We did a proposed town budget overview, which was about a 4 or 5 page document that you would have got at the beginning of the smaller version of the budget. There was also a proposed school budget overview. She's much wordier than I am, but she has more minions than I have. And then the FY15 budget request included a town budget request and a school budget request. The budget format we used, just to simplify it, are the classifications used by the Bureau of Accounts of the Department of Revenue. And this is why we know that they follow what the statute calls for. The code sections are based on the services delivered. The operating expenses are organized by department. Excuse me, and the accounts are defined by expenditure type. Again, departmental versus programmatic, expenses versus purchase of service.
Sections again are general government, public safety, education, public works, human services, and culture and recreation. And in Stoughton we have unclassified, which is shared costs. And each one of those should have been summarized with a total line item in the budget you got.
Mike's not working.
Thanks, Eric.
You can go to the next one. Account descriptions, and again, these are the accounts we used, which we've talked about. Salaries, departmental expenses, purchase of service, and then again, program services is what the department does. Program purchase of services is also what they may purchase to do. Professional development is what we spend on our staff. And capital outlay are items that are contained within the budget as capital expenditures rather than standalone articles.
How would they define what is a capital purchase that's in the budget? What would be an example?
Basically, it would be, for example, a smart board.
Coffee machine.
Copy machine could be, although a copy machine is probably a purchase service because lately we've got into the practice of leasing them rather than buying them.
So a smart board would cost, let's say it's $5,000. Say $5,000. And so Mass General Law would classify anything that has a useful life of over 3 years over $5,000 as a capital item.
Correct.
And you're actually building those into the budget now.
Some of them. Only some of them.
And what's your thoughts or strategy on that?
Partially.
Considering it an operating expense now.
Right. Well, some of them. Again, for example, we have borrowed for police cars. As you know, philosophically, I argue we shouldn't borrow for police cars in the vast majority of municipalities, not just in Massachusetts, but throughout the country. You'll find police cars are operational items. They have an average life of 3 years. They don't meet the 5-year standard. The other thing is that the board has wanted to try to cut down on the number of articles that go to town meeting. We have an opinion from council that you can include capital and meet the conditions of the bylaw by including the capital within the budget, provided it's defined as a capital outlay. So
Even if it's over $3,000?
even if it's over $3,000.
So our bylaw just doesn't matter?
No, all the bylaw says is that it must be approved by town meeting. Basically, what town council has said is that if it's identified in your budget as a capital outlay, and town meeting approves that budget, they have in fact approved that capital expenditure.
Do you show that specific expenditure so that the average town meeting rep would look at it and realize, I'm now paying for something that I normally wouldn't pay for in a budget? Would they see this here?
There is a capital outlay line item in every budget.
But they wouldn't know what that is. You couldn't tell me they wouldn't know that that's a coffee machine or a police car.
It's a summary total, right?
Correct.
There were 5 items you were purchasing there.
Correct.
So they essentially could be approving something they don't realize they're approving. They might not even realize this is a change. From looking at it, I guess that's what concerns me. By looking at it, you're not necessarily seeing, oh, wow, this is different. I need to know what it is I'm approving.
Well, they would know that it's a capital outlay because we've termed it as such. And we've termed it as such in accordance with the definition that Rick cited, which is the statutory definition. So we have the 7 account descriptions. You know them. There are 13 actual, 14 budget, FTEs for 14, adjustments for 14, 14 total, 15 requests, and 15 FTEs. What we've attempted to do in the budget process is to define a vision, to set priorities, to develop a specific plan and establish a process to do that plan, to confirm the data, which is something that this committee here has spent a great deal of time in the past trying to do, ensure the accuracy, hopefully to renew the confidence of both the committee and town meeting. Yes?
Sorry to interrupt. Through you, Mr. Hill, to the town manager.
He already said you can go directly to me.
Yeah, I never follow rules. This is kind of off the topic of this, but the one question that a lot of us are asking each other, and nobody's asking you, is why Bill Rowe wasn't part of your town budget team.
Simply because Bill Rowe is busy doing his job, which, you know, he's been chronically behind, number one. Number two, in most towns, the accountant is not part of the budget team.
Why? He has all the numbers that is, again, I understand the internal auditor has those access to the same numbers, but it just seems logical for a lot of us. We would have thought with this new format that you're going to that Bill would have been included. And again, I'm not going to speak for anybody else here.
No, it's
my thought.
It's a fair question, and frankly, the answer is that, you know, Bill is chronically behind on what needs to be done to begin with. Now that we're going to go to quarterly tax billing, reconciliation has become an even bigger issue than it has been in the past, and Bill needs to focus his efforts on being the town accountant, and typically the town accountant does not include the budget function unless the town accountant also happens to be finance director. Our town accountant is not finance director. He does not have an assistant town accountant. So he has a specific function under the statute that he has to perform. And that's where, you know, at least ways for the time being, I want him to focus his efforts. I think that, and we'll get to it, with some changes that we'd like to make in our financial package, I would like to use Bill in the budget process. But right now, having him involved in the budget process takes away from his other work. And right now, I believe his other work is a higher priority. Yes?
I was held my salary question. I thought you might have a salary section. I understand what you're doing with an expenses, and I have to get my mind around how they tie into the new categories. But for salaries, it's basically employees, overtime, and longevity. There used to be a lot more line items in salaries. So did you take all, for example, the stipends and the contractual line items that went along with the person? Is that now in the employee category? Because there used to be a whole lot more than just the salary line items.
You want to take that one? You want to take that one?
It is, well, everything but everything but overtime and longevity is in the employee line. So if you take a large department that might have education, holiday pay, stipends, it is in the employee salary line. That's
Also,
correct.
Overtime, some departments are very creative. I know some departments had like up to 6 different line items that all basically meant overtime. Are
Well,
those
that's-
all in overtime, or are some of those?
No, that's what we got into when we talked about charging to the wrong line item. We have had departments who have, in order to do their overtime, they've charged it to items other than overtime because they've exhausted their overtime budget.
So is overtime real overtime, is what I'm asking? Is any
Yes.
overtime in the employee line item? That's salary, that's
It is-
contractual, that's stipend?
it is now.
It's nothing that's not out of that?
Where we have come to agreements with unions, we have done away with stipends. So, and that is the long-term goal overall. For example, we currently pay a stipend to a police officer for carrying a gun, which I happen to believe is ridiculous because you can't be a police officer if you can't carry a gun. You know, but that's all a matter of collective bargaining, and that's something we intend to do in the long run. But for example, the stipends for superior officers who settle, I believe, have all been eliminated.
Yeah.
They've all been rolled into the base.
The unit-wide stipends have been eliminated, and we're negotiating to eliminate them elsewhere. What we're looking, if you're talking about a designation, for example, a placement to be a detective, we view that as an individual. We view that as an individual cost that's a salary cost. We also took and tried following through on the past year's charges that we saw, tried to segregate the overtime costs, because it is something that should be analyzed, and it should be not only verified, but justified by the department head.
And the last question is, on any of the contracts that hadn't settled last year, if there was money in the budget for those, would I see those in employees as well?
There is no
There is no money.
collective bargaining money.
I believe the budget message says that there is no, the only collective bargaining money that is presently available is in the fiscal 14 budget, in the selectmen's budget.
And that will go away if there's no settlements.
Okay, so if someone does settle,
Then we have articles.
That would come from that unallocated revenue, and we do have articles.
articles, okay.
Yeah.
So it's not like
Yeah,
last year?
the warrant includes the articles.
Okay.
No.
And I will say that we have a high degree of confidence in the numbers. We're not trying to argue that they're perfect. We're not saying that. But we had no confidence in what you were getting before. We do have confidence in what you've gotten now. Yes?
I, as a taxpayer and a member of this committee, would have some interest in seeing the salaries of the department heads and maybe the second command published, available. I think it's important to know what the top people in town are making. I think that should be public knowledge, and I think it's something that we should be able to keep track of.
It is published in the Enterprise every year. They ask it, we send it to them.
Yeah, I'd like to see it as part of this.
You go to the town of Hanover, and they have a town report.
Yes.
And right beside it is everybody's salary, right down to somebody who made $20.
Yeah, I can tell you that is the case for the town of Wareham. By bylaw, it is published in the town report.
Yes, and you have been provided with where positions fit within the grid for all of the positions that are assigned. That has been given to you, correct?
Correct.
So you would be able to look down through to see the grade and step.
Yeah, instead of going through all that work, couldn't it just be provided? I mean, do you think there's any value in having that right here in the document. Because I do.
And
There's
frankly,
been a lot of-
I have to indicate I don't.
Okay.
I don't see the relevancy of it.
Because there's been a lot in the news how like 60% of the people, the employees in Boston make over $100,000, this and that. I think it's being transparent about what the top people in the town make, right up front.
But I don't disagree with that. I disagree with the fact that it's not part of a budget document.
But you're describing a process where you have to like, take all these other steps to try and figure out, or like go to the newspaper or something.
Well, or you can go as a private citizen and ask the treasurer. She'll give you the same thing. As Scott has said, it is public information. I don't think it's relevant to the budget process because you can't really change somebody's salary at town meeting. It's information that's not relevant to adopting a budget.
Okay, but you can see,
You can zero the line on it.
if somebody's making one thing in FY14, like a department head, and they're given like a 20%
Yeah, but you can zero
increase
the line item.
the next year because you think they've done a good job, or I think that's relevant.
I don't know where I would get the money if that happened,
Well,
quite
okay, it's
frankly.
just an example.
I wouldn't disagree that it has happened, but,
Compare
I
it
guess
to what people in other towns.
my experience has been as a 40-year governmental employee that what that practice does is it opens up very hard-working and, for the most part, dedicated employees to public ridicule and scorn. And that's why I prefer not to do it.
Well, I don't think that's the case. I think it provides information about your top people in town that people should know.
No, I understand your point of view.
And evaluate whether, if the position becomes vacant, whether they feel it was overpaid or not. I have a lot of experience in nonprofit accounting, and it's, we have to report that in our tax returns that we file to the feds,
Mhm.
to the state, what the top 5 people make. Okay, well anyways,
No.
I think it's,
I guess
I think it's important, but I want to ask one other thing.
Well, I would argue that if you're really interested in what the top 5 people make, then what's budgeted is not relevant. What's relevant is what's on the W-2s, and that's the information that we release to the newspaper.
Okay, well,
Because that tells you, so for example, your average police officer may make 70, 80% higher than his normal rate of pay because of details.
Right, and I'm not interested in what the average police officer makes. I'm just interested in what the top leaders make, but, okay.
So, hang on a second, let's get some order here. So Peter, then Scott. You sure? Okay. Peter, go ahead.
All right, to touch on Elizabeth, a little bit of Mr. Rock here. I would
that
like to
mic
see,
on?
like it was before, how much people make.
Pete,
What's that?
Is that mic on?
Oh, green light's on, I don't know.
Okay.
All right, but I want to go a little further than Mr. Rock. When I first got on this board, we used to get the breakdown on a department, have 60 on a payroll. But then when we questioned the department head for a list of names, which they gave us, it didn't come out to 60, it came out to like 56. So those 4, as you want to call them, ghost workers, that never existed. So they were over budget, so that kind of put a squash on that. So I think that was a good way for the subcommittees to meet with department heads, because they can keep nailed that they're not adding ghost workers, where we're leaving it up to 4 people. You people leave, we got a new town manager, a new H&R person, a new accountant over there, and they start bringing in people that they're good friends of theirs or a relative, and next thing you know, they say, okay, we're going to give so-and-so pat a little bit here and a little bit there, and nobody has any control of it.
Well, I guess
In the past, we've had some shady
argue, Peter,
characters
that the
here,
manager has
and that's
control.
why we're here today. That's why I'm against this line item salary.
Just a quick question for Susan. Susan, when we talked about overtime, how do you audit that? How do you verify it? What's the process for that?
I
So,
go through the bi-weekly payroll.
yeah.
And I compare it to the personnel action form, and I also list, in the worksheets, I list, the number of people by each salary. And I'll just take the cursor, add it up, and look at what's been submitted in payroll, and it's a pretty regular thing, and that's how we were able to ferret out that there are mischarges in terms of, charging overtime to incorrect line items. Because it has to, payroll wasn't reconciling to what I had set up. And I monitor payroll. I mean, payroll's our largest expense and our largest expenditure, and I spend a fair amount of time auditing it.
Yeah, because it could be up to $1 million in overtime. And the question is, I understand that you're verifying rates and hours and things that, the mechanics of it, but how does the purpose of it being spent be audited? So, for example, if a department has $400,000, for example, how would you know it's being spent appropriately?
We have to continue to work on that,
Yeah.
quite honestly, and we ask questions each week. We call department managers quite frequently, and
If she sees
fairly
an anomaly, she brings it to me,
Yep.
and I'll talk to the department head manager. I think the difference here, getting back to what Peter had to say, is in the past, nobody looked at this stuff. You now have people looking at it.
Yeah, and see, and that's what some of the
To go-
comfortability, one second, that's where some of the comfortability issues are. When we go to look at overtime in one particular department, I'll just take it as an example, we've asked them to track the detail and give it to us. And it's an inordinate amount of work, and we know that, and we truly appreciate the work that they do. But we think it's put them a whole lot more in touch with their overtime because it was pretty much a pass-through. Yeah, we got to send this guy to training. Yeah, this guy's on vacation. Yeah, we're understaffed here.
Well-
Yeah, we got to send somebody to court.
Yeah.
I understand all those things, but the problem is that there didn't seem to be any control or surround to it. When you're talking about $1 million in payroll in a town like this, it seemed to be a need to have better controls on the approval process for the reason for the overtime is the only point I'm getting to.
Well, and I can tell you what one better control would be, and you and I have had this conversation privately, and that is that the Finance Committee needs to close the door early. What happens is that you may have a department head who shows up in September who says, I'm going to be over, and you tell him, come back at the end of the year. And my argument would be, you tell him, no, live with your budget.
Well, actually, we say, go see the town manager.
And in a way, that leaves the door open,
And they come to us anyway.
and it makes it more difficult for us to manage it,
Yeah.
because the door's been left open.
Well, actually, the process is they've got to go through you first, or excuse me, the town manager position. So we're not giving anybody advice other than they should go see the town manager first before you come to us. And that's, I understand that, people are trying to plan ahead, but
Let's say you have one particular department, if you leave the door open, they'll put a foot in it. He has large feet.
okay, well, we've got a big door.
One problem you have with that when you say go to the town manager is there are certain departments that have the authority to assign personnel whether or not, and the town manager cannot order them not to.
For specific reasons, and there's alleged reasons.
Generic reasons. It's a very large door. And as such, you can, as Pat said, we can narrow the parameters. For example, out of grade is not overtime, even though people try to charge it to out of grade, stuff like that. But the other problem you have is, depending on the personnel used in the overtime, there are communities that would prefer overtime than lessening the overtime and hiring full-time people. Because, for example, you could use an individual of a higher pay grade. You could then, use someone of a lower, not pay grade, let's say a lower grade, to fill in for that individual. And considering that you're paying time and a half, well, hiring someone at that higher grade, when you include all the benefits, you're paying time and a half. So in effect, you've got a bargain using someone at the lower grade, and a number of communities will do that. It's not good for the health of the department, but yes, they will do that.
We've done that here in the past.
You certainly asked that question.
Hired more personnel to keep the overtime down, and then the overtime still went up.
I know.
Pardon?
We have an order here.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Roberta?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have 3 questions. One is my microphone is on.
Yep, it's on.
It's on, right there, green, go. Mr. Hartman, you mentioned about stipends, and Mr. Kelly, about you eliminated one or a few stipends, and then, but the statement was also made that they were rolled into the salary. So how is there an elimination of a stipend if it's rolled into the salary?
I can take that. In the past, what has happened is the community, rather than grant, say, raise of a particular percentage, say, to police officers, instead decided to give police officers a stipend to wear a gun.
Oh, I know all about
And
those.
that's part of their base salary, but it's a stipend. So when you negotiate with them, if you want that stipend to go away, you have to find a way to buy that. And the way you generally buy that is by rolling that stipend into the base. It's budget neutral, because if you're getting a $1,500 stipend for carrying a gun, and then you roll that stipend into the base, you're still spending the same amount of money.
And in the future,
That's what I'm saying. So
and
what's the deal?
But in the future, the stipend has now gone away, and you will not then be faced with, especially for police and fire, having to not only grant a raise,
I get it.
but
Okay.
when you go to JLMC, they're going to grant the raise, but they're going to take that same percentage and increase
I
those
understand.
stipends.
Okay. That's my first question. The second...
Actually saves money in the long run.
I understand that now. The other thing is with the overtime. Now, it has been the practice in some departments to pay overtime for people who take work home on the weekends. They do the work at home, and the department charges overtime slips, or however they do that to the town.
Our present policy is that nobody takes work home without my permission.
All right, now let me go further on that. Are you allowing then employees to take work home that might be able to be done within working hours and be paid time and a half, or maybe if it's done on a Sunday, it could be double time? I don't know what your...
The answer to that question is no. The only person I would allow to take work home, Mr. Kelly does it all the time. I do it. I know Susan does it. Is salaried people who aren't eligible for overtime.
It's one person.
It was, yeah, but yeah, we have one person who does it, and we're in the process of stopping that.
All right, so if you are in the process of stopping it, the take-home non-salaried person or people will no longer, that won't be happening anymore.
It's at your discretion is what you're saying.
It is at my discretion, and right now,
I understand the
like I
difference
said, we
between
do have
salary-
one individual that is doing it. Jamie just reminded me, and that is because that department is behind, and that department needs to catch up.
All right, so,
And right now, there's been a time limit put on it.
All right,
Yeah.
that's what I want to get to. I wanted to get to that.
A drop dead date that's been given to that
Okay,
department.
all right.
But you
okay.
do, just for the record, you do frequently have salaried employees who take work home.
I understand that, but you're not paid overtime, I would
Correct.
think.
Correct.
I understand that, because you are paid a salary to do a job, whether it takes you 10 hours or 24 hours.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Third question.
Yes, they can. They're allowed to adjust their schedule.
What?
Susan will be off.
Oh, I understand that. No, it's the amount of work that you do. Your salary, I mean, your schedule could be adjusted. I understand that business.
Yeah, that's basic wage and hour law.
We haven't talked about this yet, but you've talked about this as the town budget.
Correct.
We're all one town here.
Mm-hmm.
And you've defined a lot of things that, actually, I applaud your presentation tonight so far. For me, it's been a good presentation. But what I want to know is, if we're all one town, why does the school department now still have the same format?
Well, we're going to get to that in a later slide.
Okay, so how many attractions? So I have to hold on for that.
We'll jump back into that.
Right.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess to finish this slide, what we're trying to do is put in some fiscal discipline for some of the abuses that you have identified long before we ever got here. Again, our basic premise is that we think that the position the Finance Committee has taken is validated, and we're attempting to get control of it. So you can go on to the next slide.
And that's why you hired the group of professionals that you hired, meaning the town.
So, assuming town meeting passes the fiscal 15 budget, this is what we intend to do in fiscal 16. And that is that we will establish spending priorities. The town manager and the department heads will draft spending plans. The department heads will be brought back into the budget process early so that they can be properly trained on how to do a budget. And that'll be done by using a spending plan for the fiscal 15 budget that's been adopted. And well, no, but it'll be 15. Don't get me going. But it's a process where we intend to use the budget that's adopted to instruct department heads how to budget going forward. Because clearly the budget exercise we did in November demonstrated that we have some significant room for improvement. So the department heads will be required to draft spending plans. They will be reviewed by the budget team. They'll be approved by the town manager. And there'll be a 6-month review on the spending plans. And then after the 6-month review, we'll begin the fiscal 16 budget. And again, the department heads will be back into the budget process. This is considered kind of a one-time anomaly. Believe me, the four of us have better stuff to do than to take the budget back to zero and reconstruct it. But again, we had no confidence in the numbers otherwise.
At your 6-month review, do you reforecast the rest of the year, or?
We're going to try to, yes. And then we intend to do a 9-month review.
Quarterly reviews, actually. So.
I mean, we have identified a need to do some in-service, and we will do the in-service. I could say it.
The budget team review of the spending plan, right, and this is dead. Budget team review is designed to allow a budget team member to sit with whatever department head needs assistance and do the spending plan with them and walk them through exactly. We found department heads that had never done a budget other than by adding 2.5% or 3% to all of their line items and passing it in. They had never looked at what was going on. They had never communicated with centralized purchasing to know what was available, and so there would eliminate redundancy of purchase of service. There wasn't a centralization of purchasing of supplies. And as we said, there was hoarding at the end and encumbering all your money at the end of the year, which stops accounting from closing the books in a timely fashion.
It also creates the bulk of your budget adjustments that you see, and spurs all sorts of questions. That's been, I keep on saying it, and it may sound trite after a while, but really what we're trying to do is change a culture. And it's a culture that's evolved for whatever reason. Again, just to show you again, these have been the instructions that we have gotten from the Board of Selectmen. You can go on to the next one.
Michael,
Yeah.
Scott has a question.
Oh. Can you even see from where you're sitting?
Oh,
Okay.
He looks
Well, I
around
know you
the
listen,
corner.
but I
What the previous slide that you showed that said prioritizing, when I was on the board, I asked the town manager to do exactly what you're doing now, and it fell on deaf ears. He says, oh, when it comes to budget season, we'll do it. And what I think you're doing is the right thing by getting on it early, because I said you should go department by department and get it on it early and find out how it's going to lay out, because everything just gets thrown on the warrant. And I'll tell you what, you don't need a lot of warrants, because the selectmen can say no, and they never say no. That's the problem.
I understand. What level service funding requires is that we increase our efficiency and maintain our services. We will be doing that through a series of reorganizations, some reassignments. There will be some retirements, and there may in fact be some layoffs. The idea is to get better services with the same personnel, to get the right person into the right job, and wherever possible to stress professional development, which is why we created a separate line item for professional development. The idea is to invest in our staff and get them to a level that we can get them at. We also, under level service funding, are looking to integrate administrative service delivery. This ties a bit to what Roberta was talking about. We want to reorganize IT functions and the software. Jamie is currently working with the superintendent of schools. For those of you who have not heard, Dr. Gray has announced his retirement. We are involved in the recruiting of Dr. Gray.
Recruiting a new department head and an assistant department head, and at the same time looking at all of the financial and business software that is being used by both departments. Right now, none of it talks to each other. And I don't mean that by school town, I also mean that by departments.
All right, to the town, and we do have a slide on that. You had a question?
As far as getting a little bit off the but as far as the tax bills, we're supposed to go out and they're supposed to be due in November. And I think it's been 10 years since they get out on time. Is that a townhouse issue, or is that caused from some other?
That's typically because the accountant has been slow in reconciling.
Okay,
and it's
so
been
I always
because
get the
he's had-
answer, it's the state doesn't get the stuff back. But years
no.
ago, it was always on time.
No, it doesn't get in on time, frankly, which is why the state doesn't get it back. And it's because Mr. Rowe's been doing so many other things besides the accountant's job, which is, again, to get back to his question, one of the reasons why we cut him out of the budget process. He
Okay,
needs to
so-
focus on, especially going to quarterly tax billing, it's absolutely paramount that we get the reconciliation done on.
That's something you're hoping to straighten out down the road?
It's something I
It
will
seems
straighten
to
out.
getting worse all the time. I'm sure we have to borrow money to run the town.
No, actually, we've been very fortunate. We have not had to issue tax anticipation notes. Our cash flow has been sufficient that it's not been necessary. It's been some years now since the town had to borrow money.
And just, the state is stricter with people, towns, that have quarterly billing. And because of that, they will put you, if you do not get your books closed and the information into them, they will put you at the bottom of the list to get your tax rate approved. So now, more than ever, the accountant's office has to work to get his work done, coordinate with the treasurer collector and the Board of Assessors to get the tax rate in to have it approved by DOR.
And there are a lot of reasons why it's not done timely, and again, that we have a slide that shows that. We did rebid the insurance services. It saved us over $100,000. We are beginning to centralize procurements. Most procurements now are centralized. We have a few yet to go. We have been having joint meetings between the town and the school finance team. We have been having a joint town function with the labor relations and HR function. These are some of the things we're doing to try to standardize between the two ends of Pearl Street. Next slide.
I had something to say about that software. It seems like a few years ago, we spent a few $100,000 upgrading the software at, I think, Bill Rowe's office for payroll and at the school side, but both the school and the town hall, they didn't speak to each other, but
they still don't.
Either one didn't want to change to one format. So
Well,
over here we had AB, and over there they had
Well, and that's what we're looking at.
D&D. So
We'll get to that in a
and they
minute.
had to go upstate New York to get educated on this format. So now all that money is just out the window, and we're going to
Well,
spend
no,
more money to upgrade it.
We've got to explain that to you coming up.
Right. And that purchase that you're talking about actually took place in 2001. So it's been 12 years. Now,
I think it was that far back.
well, what you're
No.
talking about also is Harper's.
Harper's,
And Harper's
payroll.
isn't going away. We use Harper's for payroll. That's not going anywhere.
For both town and school?
Yes.
Yes. Now.
And like I said earlier, it hasn't been problem-free, but it is working. You know, in terms of what we tried to do for transparency and budget, and I realize a lot of you think it's not transparent, so I'll grant you that. We have attempted to show grants as revenue, which has not been shown in the past, and we have attempted to straighten out the issue with FTEs, which not only has been an issue for you all, but it's been an issue for the Board of Selectmen too. And we're now, you know, like I say, we're using the personnel action forms, making sure they're assigned to positions and the position to the FTE, and we're trying to do a better job of cataloging budget adjustments. When I first got here, I was thinking, what are these budget adjustments? We now have a definition for that, because typically, for example, if you had to have a fall town meeting in order to adjust your budget, that would show up as a budget adjustment. And the budget adjustments we are showing are not happening at a special town meeting. They're happening because of other reasons. The board suggested we fund, not suggested, indicated we needed to fund the DPW mandates. There were DPW mandates, basically license requirements. So we had to add a minimum of 2 licensed operators. So that was a net 2 position. The school mandates are the Common Core standards, Chapter 222, and the retail training. And don't ask me what retail means, because I don't know. Maybe Jamie knows.
It's 222 is bringing people from out of district back in. You have to educate people who are not out of district, who you've excluded from the classroom. You still have to educate them. And I'm sure Dr. Yarrow can explain retail.
That's true. I forgot he was here. You could explain all that. I don't want to. Okay. Yes.
Just a quick thing. I was watching a thing on TV about the...
Ed, no, this is not public hearing.
Oh, this is important
I
about.
would like to just keep your questions to the end.
Okay.
If the town manager
Well, have
wants to
something to do with
answer it,
Common Core
if he
that he's
does.
talking about now.
Okay, but let's keep the questions to the end. Let's let them get through their program here, and then we'll have questions then. And if the town manager wants to take questions from non-finance committee, then he's more than
That would be the
welcome.
peanut gallery.
I got no problem with that. I just want to wait to the end right now.
In terms of funding our capital projects, we're going through the process of reviewing our borrowing. In fact, we have a ratings call scheduled for early March. We're attempting to access the lowest rates. In order to improve it, you have an article at town meeting to establish an OPEB fund.
Yep.
That will improve our bond rating, even if it's funded with pennies. We are trying to review the unfunded liabilities, which was something that Roberta brought up. Tonight, I gave Rick a copy of the actuarial study that resulted in our pension costs going up 10%. And you all should have gotten a copy of that, or if you haven't yet, you will before your meeting's over. We're also thinking about changing our rating agency. We currently use Moody's. Standards & Poor's typically rates higher than Moody's, and that does impact our percentage, and it's up to us which of the rating agencies we choose to use. So in the future, we may be shopping that to Standard & Poor's. Of course, we need to fund general capital projects. Some issue versus whether or not we go for general funds versus debt exclusion. And, you know, one of the things that we could look at are revenue bonds. We have not used them in the past. There are some projects that you could use revenue bonds for. And if you use a revenue bond, then it's not part of the, it's not a GOB, which is a general obligation bond, which is basically certified by the full faith and credit of the town. Capital budget priorities, and this is, you know, they're not in any particular order. I need to clarify this. This has been discussed by both the selectmen and the school committee. Library construction, high school project, whatever that is. There are operational capital projects. We believe that the master plan will have some budget ramifications. Clearly, the sewer capital plan will have some budget ramifications. There are several areas of the town that are not sewered now that were likely to be ordered by DEP at some point in the future to sewer. So it's not just the Park Street sewer. There are other areas of town where there are no sewer, where we have reason to believe that it's just a matter of time before DEP knocks on our door and we have to enter into a consent agreement. You have the downtown redevelopment. Even though I want to call that Elm School construction, we don't have an Elm School. It's elementary school, primarily South School, which is, according to whom you talk to, is actually could be in worse shape than the high school. Eventually, if you've been in the middle school, you know that the middle school's condition is not all that much better than the high school, and it'll have to be upgraded at some point. Park Street development is the sewer. North Stoughton development, and a public safety complex, which, if you recall, last year's town meeting appropriated $60,000 to take a look at the feasibility of a joint police and fire public safety complex. Please, Jamie. So when you take a look at what we got coming, and this is part of what I've been trying to say to the selectmen and to this group, we have much bigger issues to face than just the operational budget. When you look on the horizon and what we've got out there, you've got $14 million coming in library construction, and even though it's eligible for up to a $7 million grant, we have to borrow the whole $14 million. We don't have a choice. You've got approximately $80 million for high school construction if it has to be rebuilt, somewhat less if it can just be reconditioned, but it's still a major amount of money. Even if you give 50% reimbursement, you're still going to have to finance $40 million of it, and again, you have to borrow the whole $80 million. Again, we don't know what the master plan is going to cost. We don't know what the capital plan, the sewer capital plan is going to cost. Downtown redevelopment is a big question mark. Current estimate for an elementary school is $40 million. Current estimate for middle school is $60 million. And again, those are completely new schools, not necessarily reconstruction. So this is meant to be kind of a worst case scenario. Public safety complex, we figure somewhere between 15 and 19 million. Will depend upon whether or not we can build it on town land. If you have to acquire town land, it'll be closer to 19 million. If you don't have to acquire town land, it'll be less. So what you're looking at there over the next decade is a minimum of $225 million that the town's going to have to assume. And that's what we believe people should be focusing on how are we going to pay for this debt.
What's the lottery prize tonight?
There's no,
Well,
Don't look at that, the pay.
let me just qualify though, of the 225 million, 180,000, 180 million.
right. So if we get,
Getting reimbursed
if
up
we,
to
if we,
I know we're gonna borrow for it.
no, 50% is going to be our maximum.
60%.
But that doesn't include the soft costs, and it doesn't include anything you do outside the building,
I understand.
and it doesn't include any of the communications equipment in the building.
Okay.
So it's not as good of a deal. So when you take a look, and this was a question that Roberta had, our so-called town debt. Personally, this is my own bias. I tried to change the slide. I was outvoted. We do not have a retirement debt, and we do not have an OPEB debt. They're liabilities.
That's right.
They're not debts.
That's right.
They are on the books. The rating agencies call them debt, but realistically, this is not money we owed, and I'll go back to what Rick said. We're not looking to go out of business anytime in the future, so it's really a liability and not a debt. But our OPEB, our unfunded retirement debt, according to the latest Moody's rating, is $65 million. The OPEB, the latest we saw, was $122 million.
All of these will be revised in spring.
And this is our existing debt. This is what we believe is the new debt that's coming on that's already been approved at town meeting. And this does not include any of those projects, including the library. So this is a snapshot of what we know going forward from our debt schedules. We'll be paying between fiscal 15 and fiscal 20. And this is what we know, what we're borrowing, because it's already been authorized at town meeting, and we know what those costs will be. And again, this does not include the library. So we think that we can improve our credit rating, which will improve our borrowing stance. You're talking about basis points, which isn't a lot, but over a 20-year loan, it adds up. But we think budgeting within 2.5 and the new growth, which we believe this budget is done. Long-term planning, especially relative to your pension obligations and your OPEB obligations. And actually, the pension obligations come out of that actuarial study. There's no way we can prepay that because we don't have our own pension system. We pay whatever Norfolk County presents to us.
And the timing of this is, I think we have to 2040, right? And right now we're on track to pay it off or to catch up on our obligation by 2023 or 24 or something like that.
2030, Sue thinks it could be.
2030?
Yeah, because in 2023 we're at 76% still.
Okay. All right. Well, actually, that's old data because they readjusted our payment schedule.
Right.
Before it was less.
Right, and they're actually saying that we can look at increases of 10% a year between now and 2019. Well, you'll see that in the actuarial report, which is different than they told us until we saw the actuarial report. Performance of the stock market may improve that, but you could be looking at somewhere, this year it was $488,000, $388,000. That was the 10%. If it's going to go up 10% a year for the next 4 years, you're looking at extra money going out that we had not counted on. We're going to go to a multi-year financial plan. We had hoped to get it done this year, but because we had to take the budget back down to zero, we were not successful in doing that. The charter actually requires a 3-year spending plan, and we're not there yet. We are in the process right now of recruiting for an economic development specialist. The master plan portion on economic development strategies is getting close to getting done. They just held a public meeting, I don't know, a week ago. Does that sound right? Where they laid out some of what they've done and where they think they're going. And we need to improve the financial technology integration, which gets to what Peter was talking about. Next slide, please.
That was for both Standard & Poor's and Moody's. That is the criteria they're looking for credit improvement.
Right, but we think we can get a better rating from S&P than we can from Moody's.
Preaching to the choir.
Even though S&P, you have to remember, as I told Jamie today, S&P said it was okay to buy AIG. So,
Take that back.
yeah, they'd love to.
Oh, AIG paid their bill.
We have a significant problem, and have had really for years. The town and school financial software is not integrated, and that's part of the reason why it takes so long to close the books. And a lot of it is done manually. The accountant and the treasurer were using different versions of KVS, and the two versions didn't talk to each other. The treasurer and the DPW use different software for utilities. What has happened in the past year is KVS has been sold to a firm called Springbrook. Springbrook is not publicly owned, which is part of the problem with KVS. And what that means is basically they don't sell stock. They're still owned by their creators, or their founders. And somewhere along the line in these tech companies, the owner wants his money out, or her money out. That's what's happened with KVS. KVS has been sold to Springbrook. So we have been told that we are going to have to change our business procedures, that there will be additional costs if we keep KVS/Springbrook, and we will have to convert, we'll have to undergo a software conversion anyway, because KVS is going to go away, because again, KVS was bought by Springbrook, not the other way around. And none of this is integrated to the payroll software, which is what Peter was talking about, which is what we purchased 2, maybe 3 years ago. That is fully integrated now and is working well between both ends of Pearl Street. So it's time for change. There is in the capital plan a request for $900,000 to buy an integrated financial package that will replace 3 different softwares the town is currently using, and 3 different softwares the school is currently using, and use one software at both ends of Pearl Street that's fully integrated, that talks to each other electronically.
Are you going to go to a new company, or you're going to stay with Springbrook?
No, we are going to go to, my preference is to go to a publicly traded company. We are looking at a company called, or a product called Munis that comes from Tyler Technologies. Munis is fully integrated in towns and schools in more than 100 communities in Massachusetts, and is currently being used by a lot of communities. So that's the direction we're headed. We've had conversations with the superintendent. She is on board. And we're looking at, like I say, probably $900,000 to purchase the software, yes.
Do you have a date in mind when you would do this?
Well, if for example, the town meeting approves the capital expenditure, if you guys recommend it and town meeting approves it, and it's approved as a borrowing article, 5 days after the end of town meeting, we can actually borrow the money and buy the software and commence the conversion. If it's approved as a cash article, then it has to wait until July 1st. We do have Munis. Munis is coming. They'll be here twice. They're coming on the 28th to meet with the finance teams of the town and the school in a joint meeting. And then they will be back on March 13th to do a day-long demo and show how their software works. We're looking at them because they're on the state bid list, so we don't have to move as slowly as you would if you were going to go out for proposals. There are other softwares that are just as good as Munis. We've looked at those. Unfortunately, they're both privately held, which means at some point in time they will probably be sold or absorbed by another company. Tyler Technologies buys software companies. That's what they do. They own over 30 different software companies. Munis is one of them. Munis actually started in Maine. Tyler Technologies is a Texas company, but Munis is still headquartered in Maine.
All right, listen, I really would like to ask everybody to hold their questions until we're done with the presentations, and then we'll open it up to everybody, okay?
Economic development, again, downtown redevelopment. We'd like to limit 40B and 40R housing. We'd like to improve the schools. There's going to be a town-wide master plan. It probably will involve infrastructure improvements that need to be made. And there's currently an attempt on the part of the Board of Selectmen to enhance the hospitality industry. There is an article in the warrant to petition the state legislature for additional all alcohol licenses. Nobody wants to come in and open a restaurant without an alcohol license. And that's a problem we have. Most of our alcohol licenses have been allocated. Overall, and this is a summary, we think, of the budget proposal that's before you. The operational budget, again, is within 2.5 in new growth. It shows all the wages, general fund and non-general fund, as well as grant wages. It does not include collective bargaining other than those 3 units that have settled. There has been a reduction in the overall number of FTEs. Part of it simply because we've got a better handle on it. We believe most of the inaccuracies have been removed. Like I said earlier, we're not telling you it's perfect, but we have a high level of confidence in it compared to what was out there before. And going forward, we're establishing this spending plan methodology to basically teach our department heads how to do a better job on doing their budgets. And then we hope to go to a 2-year and then a 3-year cycle. We're trying to focus on the bottom line and future planning because of the future planning piece and the $225 million we talked about. And under the specific budget proposal is one, to eliminate the enterprise ambulance fund. I guess I would like to go on record that there is a rumor going about that eliminating the enterprise fund is the first step towards privatizing the ambulance. I will commit now that I have no intention, neither does the Board of Selectmen, of privatizing the ambulance. Privatizing the ambulance would result in a diminishment of services. I don't think the community wants a diminishment of services. The other thing is you can't spend as much. I've spent most of my adult life in service in government. And I happen to believe that municipal services are best provided by municipal employees. So there is no plan to privatize. The problem you have is that the enterprise fund is not self-supporting. It loses money. It will continue to lose money, especially when you account for its actual costs. And it's just a matter of time before DOR comes in and makes us eliminate it anyway, because they are going around the state and requiring communities who have enterprise funds change them to offset receipt funds. And an offset receipt fund basically is just what that means. The receipts offset the cost, but it's all done within the general fund. The other thing that I would like to propose, and it's not part of this budget, but if we are successful in eliminating the enterprise fund and going to an offset receipts fund, I intend to come back next town meeting and ask town meeting to create an ambulance equipment fund, and that we would dedicate the first $50,000, $40,000, you pick a number, of the ambulance receipts to a defined fund that would then be used to purchase a new ambulance every 5 years. And so that capital article would go away. If you're putting in $50K a year, approximate cost of an ambulance now is $250,000. Every 5 years you would have enough money in your account for town meeting to appropriate it out and buy a new ambulance every 5 years. So that would be the long-term goal there. We have centralized the, we've talked about combining police and fire dispatch. There is an accompanying capital article in order to do that. I need to specify, because folks have asked, what if we build a public safety building? Of the $230,000 cost for the capital article, all of it but $10,000 worth, which is to take out a wall and put in some new wiring, will be able to move to the new station. So we've covered that. The idea behind, according to the chief, there is not a shift that goes by where you don't have a police officer dispatching. And a police officer dispatching at time and a half is getting about double time or double time and a half what you would, what a dispatcher would get. But because we don't have a centralized dispatch function, so the idea here, and as I told the selectmen, I can't tell you this is going to save money. I can tell you it's going to put more bodies on the street, more police officers, and I think you're going to get a better dispatch product overall. We're also transferring crossing guards from the schools to police. We've centralized part-time clerical into the town clerk budget. We've created a separate line item for community events, and community events will now be working with the recreation department rather than the manager's office to fund their activities. They met with the Board of Selectmen last night. The Board of Selectmen acknowledged them as a formal committee and appointed them to terms ending July 15th so that they have coverage for now. They've never really been officially constituted as a community. They've never been sworn to office, and that created a personal liability for them. We're also going to modernize the administrator classifications. A lot of that is in the budget. We have created only one new position, and that is a new facilities manager. And in order to create the facilities manager's position, we have eliminated a full-time janitorial position. Outside of the mandates. The mandates you've already been told about. So the only one that's not mandated is a facilities manager. I don't have to tell you how the buildings have been taken care of and why we need a facilities manager. And we were able to do that by eliminating a custodial position, and we're taking also 2 part-time custodial positions and combining them into 1 full-time, nighttime custodial.
Civilian oversight?
Under civilian oversight, yeah.
I don't know, but there is a new position, though, isn't there, for, that's new?
Right, there is a new position, yeah, you're right. How come the lights went out? Oh, okay. Rick's right, there is 1 new civilian position, so even with the 2 new folks in DPW, the 1 new folks in facility, and the 1 new position in police department, the FTEs have gone down. And that does not include laying anybody off or anything. Again, we think that was because the count was off, and we now have a better handle on the number of FTEs we have. Was that the last slide? All right.
There's your end of the show.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
it says end up
So,
there.
can I suggest we move back out there, because it's a little warm in here?
It's very warm in here.
Yeah.
Just going hoarse.
So let me first say that that was very informative. Thank you very much for all the effort that went into producing that. Answers a lot of questions for this board. Certainly there's, I'm sure, questions to be had, but I wanted to save the rest of the questions from the presentation to the end, if we could do that. So if anybody had some questions that they wanted to ask of the budget committee, then please.
I also thank you for the opportunity to give us a chance to explain our reasoning. As I indicated, there was no attempt to take away transparency, trying to get folks to focus on the important issues.
Okay. Other questions? I know that a few people had. Joe?
Actually, getting back to your payroll, your new payroll, it's kind of twofold. Does that include new training, also the new programs, right?
You mean the new financial package?
Yes, yeah.
That amount would cover just about everything that the financial package has to offer, including the conversion and the training. It would not include, they also have a payroll package. But because we're committed to Harper's, we will not be purchasing the payroll package until after the commitment to Harper's goes away.
Okay. Will that add more employees or delete employees, or things just stay the same?
No, it will not. Yeah, and it should speed up the reconciliations because, again, the various modules need to be able to speak to each other electronically. Have to be, again, what happens now is that the school department does their budget in Excel, and then they physically input it into KVS, or excuse me, into Budget Sense.
You mean they rekey it?
Yeah, it's sent over here, and then it's rekeyed into KVS over here.
Right.
What happens here is our budgets are done in Excel, and then they're keyed into KVS. And the monthly reports that you receive as a committee on expenditures are all in the KVS format. They don't come out in the Excel format.
Can I ask one more question? It gets back to, you were looking into the full liquor license, additional full liquor licenses to bring new enterprises and new restaurants and so forth. Does that have to go through the state? I forget how.
Correct.
So if we wanted 4 more licenses, we'd have to get the approval of the state?
The selectmen are actually requesting 6.
6, okay.
And it would go to, if town meeting adopts it, it would go as a petition to the legislature for a special act.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Jim and then Roberta.
I've got to commend you on the presentation in there. I think that most of the things that you talked about in there and are trying to address were things that we all kind of had a comment about during our meetings here. One of the things that did jump into my head, though, as I watched you go through your presentation was you kept saying that somewhere along the line this was intended to show the town taxpayers where their money is being spent. But I don't see the categorized budget as showing the people where their money is being spent. It kind of gives them an idea, but if you've got an elevator inspector in here and you've got a fire inspector in here and you've got a Xerox machine repairman in here, it's all going to go down under these services procurement. So you can't really see where this money is being spent, only this very large budget that is going to, because elevators are every 3 years, fire inspections are every 5 years. So you're going to get these jumps in these little things as they come up, and you're not ever going to know what anything was being spent for with the categories. Thank you.
The 4 major categories show the residents what's being spent on their services. The program expenses and program purchase of services is the function of the department. It's the mission, the goal, the responsibilities in delivering services to the taxpayer. The department expenses and the department purchase of services are those expenditures which go to directly support the department, and those expenditures can be moved. Doesn't mean that they will. There's no anticipation of that. It's describing the type of expenditure. If you were to give $1 to United Way, Salvation Army, or whatever, you would want to know how much is being spent to run United Way, Salvation Army, versus what they're doing to fulfill their responsibilities. And that's the inherent basis for the 4 categories. There's also not a city or town in Massachusetts that I know of that appropriates in the line item detail that Stoughton has. And it's an effort to appropriate in a more efficient manner and describe the type of expenditure that's being appropriated. Most towns appropriate salaries and expenditures, 2 lines. They're not listed with a line item number. They could be listed A, B, C, D, 1 through 50. That's generally the appropriation model in Massachusetts.
Mr. Chairman, to follow up on your question, the information you're looking for is not appropriate in a budget. It's appropriate in the spending plan. That is where you determine that you're going to be using so much for inspectional services, so much, and that is what the next step of this process is to have the individual departments sit down with this budget team and determine where they're going to spend the money.
How am I ever going to know whether we're spending too much on services unless I know what services we're spending it on?
The spending plans will be a public document.
Yeah, they'll be available. You'll also get, you know, it's my understanding you're receiving the monthly expenditure reports.
We are.
So, you know, if you look at those, if you can read them, and I'll grant you they're not the easiest thing in the world to read, that information is there very specifically. And I guess we're open to suggestions for different name versus support and function. But again, it's like, you know, it's like Susan said, the idea is to show you how much it costs to run the town as opposed to do the services. It's trying to break it out into two distinct categories, and maybe we didn't name it the best way we could, and we're open to naming it differently if it makes people understand it better. But again, the attempt was to show people, you know, the difference between support and function.
All set, Jim? Roberta?
Thank you, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and through you to Mr. Hartman, please. Are we going to be able to either electronically be sent or get a hard copy of the presentation?
That's what the noise is. She's making copies right now.
Oh, good. Okay, that's first.
Yeah, the microphone's
I have
inanimate.
5 things. They're quick, though.
Can you step through them quickly?
I will.
Which
Okay,
would you
thanks.
prefer?
The school budget team, you mentioned on one of the slides that there's a school budget team and a municipal budget team. Who's on the school budget team?
It's actually the finance team, not the budget team.
So they
Basically, our finance staff has been meeting regularly with their finance staff. Their finance staff consists primarily of 2 individuals. Occasionally, the superintendent will sit in. Sometimes it does not include the superintendent.
Sometimes Joel.
Sometimes Joel Hardy will sit in.
So the school department has a finance staff.
Correct.
All right, and that's 2 individuals?
Correct.
And Joel Harding, and who else?
The superintendent.
Sue tells me there are 3, not 2.
Superintendent, who else?
Okay. They have 3. I'm sorry.
Well, who's the third one?
I believe there's Maria, who's the business manager
The business
or
manager? Okay.
finance leader. There's a person doing AP and there's a person doing a payroll.
Okay, accounts payable and payroll? Okay, so we call the team at the school department, we call them the finance team. Here, we call it the budget team?
No, actually, we have a finance team here that meets every Friday morning, consisting of myself, Susan,
I know that.
the town accountant, the town treasurer, the town assessor, the purchasing
Okay.
officer, and Mr. Kelly.
So you also have a finance team, okay. Now, so the school has a finance team, you have a finance team, which is a broader entity than the budget team. You have a budget team that I'm aware of.
Correct.
Does the school department also have a budget team?
Don't know.
That's a question more appropriately addressed to Superintendent Rizzi. I believe she has a budget process, and she goes through that process, but whether or not she actually has a team, I don't know.
Okay. So what I was wondering was, it seemed like from the slide presentation that maybe at some point in time the teams were going to be merged into one team for the town.
we would like to explore doing as many things with the school department jointly as we can.
All right.
We think it improves the level of what happens and gives the taxpayer more accountability.
All right, last but not least, that RETELL, RETELL stands for the following, because I read the school department budget. It's called Rethinking Equity and Teaching for English Language Learners.
Okay, thank you.
And it also involves training and transition to a new state assessment system for this new program, set up in 2012.
Okay.
I know nothing more about it.
That's a lot more than I know about it, so.
Well, but in referencing the unfunded mandates, again, I'd like to commend yourself and the superintendent of schools putting together the joint budget summary that you did, which details a lot of those standout expenses, which are driving some of the cost increases in managing the town business. So, so there's a great deal of detail there. It's 12 pages long, and it's very informative. So,
Yeah, I'll accept the picture.
other questions from the committee? I have one more that I've been asked several times by a number of folks, and so, and I forget what you were calling it, pay receipt, what was it, instead of an enterprise account?
Offset receipts.
Offset receipts.
And basically, just the receipts offset the cost.
Okay, so how would the fire department?
Our trash program is an offset receipts account. frankly.
Okay. So the receipts are shown on the revenue report. We understand what the expenses are.
Correct.
Okay. So the question became, for example, for the fire department specifically, where are the revenues, where are the ambulance funds, the income for that going to be shown? Are there going to be a separate line item in the ambulance department? Or is it just a revenue sheet item, or how is that going to?
Yeah, it would be shown within the general fund as ambulance revenue under the listing on the revenue sheet. That's where it would be shown.
Okay, so every month when the budget, when the expense recap is done, is there going to be an income recap done as well that will show that, et cetera?
My hunch is that, yes, there will be, but it may not be for the same period. Maybe once we get the new software, it'll be for the same period, but I would be very surprised now if they are for the same period.
Well, we know that we've been in
Revenues are almost always 6 months behind until you get to crunch time.
Right, we know that we've been behind in.
You know, and again, I think
updated.
a great deal of that difficulty is the quality of the software we have.
Yeah, and yeah, separately, it's an enterprise account. It wasn't any better, so, but, okay. Any other questions for the town budget committee? Okay, I think that's it. Thank you so much for your time. Oh, I'm sorry. I did say that I'd open it up to the end if, at your discretion if you wanted to take some questions from the audience. Mr. DeFelice.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I want to thank this group that put this together, because I've been involved here for a long time, and this is probably the most concise presentation I've seen. There's a few things, obviously, that we may not all agree on, but are you folks going to bring this to the town meeting? Because that might be very informative there, too. Just a suggestion.
I don't know, I guess that would be, my reading of the charter is you guys decide what the budget article is, so you would have to co-opt the process.
Also, I didn't note in the presentation, I think we have a $50 million plus or minus commitment to repair buildings. Where does that enter into the picture?
Can you be specific, Ed? I'm not sure what that
Well, the
refers
thing
to.
that Dick Fitzgerald chairs, the about maintaining or rehabbing or whatever the buildings, remember we passed that at town meeting, I think it was something like $50 million involved in that?
Facilities master plan.
Facilities master plan that was passed?
Yeah, it was part of that, yeah. Does that come into play in some of these numbers? All right.
Well, those are estimates. They're not hard and case numbers. They were I think what they were commissioned to do is to go out, assess the structures in the town.
Which they've done, right?
Well, with that plan they did, and apply industry standards for costs to repair or bring back up to grade or whatnot, so.
Okay, but my point was that, my understanding is that that's going to be like a $15 million nut, plus or minus, and I'm just wondering if the committee has looked at that, included in their in their numbers.
And we sure know the school department has.
Yeah.
I guess we did point out infrastructure improvements, and we didn't put in a dollar amount. There is an article, for example, to replace the heating and ventilation system in this building. That's part of that plan. We've done the town roof. Part of that plan includes new carpet, which you see in the Atenas room, which eventually you will see out here at some point. So we're doing that. We're probably not going about it as formally and as energetically as the school folks are with their needs. But we are intending to come in every year with projects. And there are some that were passed last year, and there are some that are proposed in this year's budget.
And eventually we'll have a 3-year plan.
Yes.
Okay.
And also, during the conversation, it was mentioned about some of the possible new buildings that could be on the horizon, and I think the town manager made the point that some of these proposals, if they were done on currently owned properties, there'd be less money to do and so forth, which leads me to ask, I guess it's a perennial question around town, have we any idea as to what we might be doing with the Armory and the 3 acres that it sits on? Again, we
Ed, I'm
already
sorry,
own it.
could you speak up a little bit? I'm having some trouble here.
I think for some time, we've always, in the background, been talking about the Armory, which sits on 3+ acres of land. So again, it's...
Are you asking about the Armory again?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Because it came up in the discussion.
The answer to that question is there's an article
That's right.
in the warrant for a feasibility study for use of the, reuse of the Armory. One of the things that we would like to look at for potential reuse is a community center and to headquarter the recreation department. But the building needs to be looked at. It's not been properly attended to. There are some mold issues. And according to the building official, the building will have to be brought up, fully up to code if we're going to use it. And we have no idea what that's going to cost. This study will give us an idea of what it's going to cost, and then the community will have to decide what they want to do with the building.
Yeah, that's good. It's it's been out there in limbo for so long. It's nice to see that they are finally at least going to address it and decide if they're going to do something with it, because if we're not, we might as well just sell it, you know. We should do something one way or the other with it. And again, thanks for the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Are we all set on, oops. John, then Peter. We got to wrap this up, though.
Yeah.
It's 9 o'clock.
You were going to, I think we requested a summary budget including town and school together. Is that here somewhere, or like a summary page?
The totals page for,
Yeah, it went out in the detail that was sent to you. It's one of those pages.
It's in there? Okay, thank you.
I mean, I recreated it, but I couldn't find it if it is. Do you know what page it is? Okay.
Where?
Thought I was losing it.
In this particular document, which Susan has written on, it's actually page 1. It was supposed to be page 1 that went out in your,
But that's not 81 million. Page 1 is, that's not $81 million.
No, the whole, for the whole town, school and town and joints.
it's shown right here on page 1.
I think you have something that we don't.
All right, we'll make you a copy right now and get it to you.
Earlier handout that they gave us, the first night we had a meeting.
What?
The color.
Oh. Rick?
No.
Jamie says it's the one she mailed out to everybody.
Like 81,
The one,
$82 million.
so it's different, well, maybe we have different versions of this.
I hope not.
The holes in it, Rick.
It's the ones with the holes in it.
Yeah,
is
that's
what
right.
Steve is saying. Okay.
All right. So we'll make a
That's
copy of
right.
that
Jamie
right
made
now.
one that you could put in a binder.
Right.
Okay.
Well, do they have it or not? All right. Has anybody found it or no?
Steve, you have it?
I think so.
That's not,
That's what they're looking for.
not $81 million.
That's not the one I got.
That's not 81 million.
What's that?
All right, we'll make it right now and pass it out.
Thank you.
Newer than that one there.
We were under the impression it was
Well,
mailed
just
to you.
opened
We
today.
apologize for the slip up.
Get anything.
No, this is the one, the latest one I opened. What are your dates on?
Okay.
This is what, this was what.
Okay, can you get that page together for us and resend it out to the committee? It doesn't look like it's here.
All right, we can hand it out to you right now. if you
That's
want.
fine.
I mean, we can go back there and make a copy and.
Yeah,
Maybe
no,
there's
it's
another
okay.
one that I didn't get.
Okay.
Have we
there was
been
a-
released?
There was one more question. Peter, sorry.
A few years back, we spent a good amount of money to have some outside engineering company to go through all the buildings, what they had to be done. And we haven't really moved on it. So this new position you're creating here, a building facilities manager, wherever it is, basically everything's already spelled out for them.
To some extent, there have been priorities shift over time. And so what may have been identified in a facilities study is still out there, but we may have something new come up, for example.
Well, I see.
But
I
you're
see-
right. The general expectation will be that in addition to making sure that the day-to-day facility needs are met, which is not currently being met, that person will be expected to implement the facilities master plan that was done in 2009.
Right, before, if he says, okay, we need whatever we need in here, he's going to have somebody else come in and design it, right?
Well, there is also an article for an in-house architect to have on call for us, for architectural services for those projects that have to be designed and stamped.
For the town and school.
For both the town and the school, yes.
Yeah, but a lot of these, like, I see in here, you got a new, I don't know if you were looking for a furnace or a boiler for this building.
Well, I can tell you, in this building, we're replacing 4 boilers,
4 boilers.
the chiller, and the controls.
Yeah.
We were going to replace the compressor, but the compressor had to be replaced last week.
Yeah, but you can get these companies that make the boilers to come in and engineer the whole thing out for you, to tell you exactly what size boiler you need, where all the registers or radiators have to go, or how many tons of air conditioning you need, and they spec it all out, and they'll, for short money, they'll come in and inspect it and make sure it's whoever you hire, it follows that specification. So to me, it kind of lightens this guy's load up. Or do we really need this person?
Well,
but we already have somebody in here that's oversees the buildings.
what you have now is...
Can I just interject? This is actually part of the process for the article reviews, so I understand that we want to get into a discussion about those things, but I gotta ask us to move on that.
That's fine.
Okay, are we done? Okay. We're done with this section, so thank you again.
Thank you.
Truly appreciate the time and detail and effort to get this information to us, so, and the hour. All right, so I'm going to try and get through the rest of the agenda as quickly as I can. You were mailed out a FinCom calendar. I'll be updating that as we go along, but it's a base start, so it shows you what the primary dates are that we're targeting. The month of March is pretty much unaccounted for because our public hearings will more than likely be scheduled there, at least in weeks 2, 3, and 4. We've already talked about the budget detail that's been sent out, so there's already been some detail released from the Budget Review Committee, breaking down some of the line items within the budget below the payroll line, so we'll need to take a look at that. Item 4, which is the budget review, included the PowerPoint and public hearings. So we're going to need to start at least getting those scheduled and the ads placed for that. So I'll be working on that over the next 5 days, maybe 7 days to get that done. Along with the budget review, I've been asked if there was, I've been asked by several people about an opportunity to revisit a vote from our last meeting. So I'll put it out there if somebody wants to make a motion to reconsider our vote from last meeting about the subcommittees and the combining of them with the public hearings. Jim?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to reconsider Peter's motion from the last meeting to hold subcommittee meetings.
I think we actually have to reconsider the motion that was approved and voted on. So Peter had a separate motion that failed, and there was a separate motion, so whoever was in the affirmative on that can ask for that one to be reconsidered, which was, again, combining the subcommittees meetings with the public hearings into one meeting.
I voted for that, and I will move that way to set that motion aside and again return to Peter's original motion.
To reconsider the motion of last meeting that combined the subcommittee process with the hearings all as one. Basically, we abolished the subcommittee, and we want to reconsider that.
Well, I don't know, did you vote against that?
I voted for it. So it's in the affirmative that has to make the motion, correct?
Okay, so you voted in the affirmative.
Right, so he,
And, okay, good. All right, so you're seconding?
we're both in the affirmative.
All right, so we have a motion and a second to reconsider the vote from last meeting about combining the subcommittee and the public hearings into one meeting. Is there any discussion?
Rick?
Yes, Pat?
I know a lot of people, I know I just, for one, was
Thank
so
you.
confused at the last meeting. There was so much new information presented, and I just wasn't keeping up with it as much. I'm not sure what this process is going to entail. I'm honestly not. I understand what was just presented to us. I don't know to what extent the department heads were involved, but I do know that we have a lot of detailed questions we need to be asking to get a comfort level in place, and I don't know that we can have this many people asking detailed questions of every single budget during a hearing process. So I don't know what is going to happen. I don't know what it will look like, but I'm more than willing to try to stick with the subcommittee process, see what happens, although we may want to consider rejiggering our subcommittees to be more in keeping with what the new budget has for subcommittees, because they're not the same. I'm not sure where we're going to go, but I'm willing to try it.
And I have an additional thought about it. At the first thought about this, and maybe we did kind of rush to consider that. I guess when I knew that we had a budget team in place, that budget team would be meeting with the individual subcommittees. The subcommittees would chunk off their sections of the budgets and then upload to the whole committee, as we've done in the past. That's what I thought the process would be. It's what I envisioned. I hadn't thought outside the box of combining the two disciplines, subcommittees and public hearings. And as I thought about it, I said, geez, maybe that's going to be a little bit more efficient. But as I've had a chance to reflect on it over the last several days, it seems to me like we're going to have many more public hearings to accommodate this. And our process of subcommittees seems to have served us well in the past. And that's why I would be open to reconsidering this and having us continue in the path that we've been in the past with the subcommittees in place. So that's all I have to say. Scott?
If we go back to the subcommittee process, when we spoke to the town manager and the HR, they were the ones that did the budget. They said that the department heads were not involved in that process. You tell me, what's a department head who wasn't involved going to tell me at a budgetary small group that we're going to sit? What's he going to tell me? Every time I ask a question, he's going, I don't know, I wasn't involved. How many times can I listen to that? They told us about the only thing we're going to be able to question them on is their warrant articles, which are spelled out here. But you tell me, what's a department head going to say to me that wasn't involved in this budget?
Well, we're going to be meeting with the budget committee, who's going to answer all the questions that the subcommittee has about the budget. And if there are additional questions the subcommittee wants to ask of the department head, then, they'll be able to do that, but they might not have the detail. You're right.
That's all I'm saying to you, is that if I wasn't in the room when something was drawn up, in basic English, what the hell am I going to know about it?
Well, but they are going to have a spending plan, which details how they're going to spend, what they're going to spend, and when they're going to spend it. So that there was that whole other piece that we haven't seen yet that the department heads are going to be responsible for.
Not till next year.
Yeah,
Well, I think that they're going to be implementing it this year, but really not rolling it out until next year. For next year's budget, okay.
Well, that's what I'm trying to get at. Next year, they're going to be involved.
Okay, so you're not in favor of this?
Well, I didn't say I wasn't in favor at all. I'm just asking you to tell me what is it, that's what, I'm trying to get that out there, that we got 17 of us here that basically are going to ask a bunch of ghosts questions.
So whether we have subcommittees or not isn't the question here in your mind. It's a matter of whether we can talk to the department head or not. The question on the table is...
What I said to you was that the last meeting was, the only way to rectify this, and you guys didn't listen to me because Bruce made the thing, I says, we should have our subcommittees here and ready to ask the questions that got to be asked, so that if we ask them, it'll push the budgetary committee to ask or set us up with the other ones. You know what I mean? We meet with the department heads like we normally did. There's going to be no conversation whatsoever.
We meet with a new group.
Right.
With them.
Right.
And we still ask the questions, but we maybe are asking it of different people now. I just don't know that I'm going to get all my fire department, for example, questions asked with 14 other people wanting to ask questions. I could take 3 hours just on the ambulance fire combined.
This is why I said, if we're going to do our budgetary, we stick within that, and you guys said, no, well, I'll ask you at once, and I says, all right.
Okay, and that's why we're reconsidering this. So hang on a second. Bruce, and then Roberta.
So your suggestion is that the subcommittees meet with the budget team from the town, or the school subcommittee would meet with
A subcommittee from the finance committee.
the subcommittee, the education subcommittee would meet with the schools like they always have.
Right.
But on the town side, the subcommittee would meet with the budget team, get the answers, then we're gonna have our public hearings when we're all, like we've done in the past. And everybody needs to remember, we have always done this. That, say, John and I are a subcommittee, we ask questions, we come give a 5-minute presentation on the budget, and then everybody here still asks questions and doesn't listen to the subcommittee. We've done that repeatedly. And the motion that I made was said, this budget team, do they need to meet with each subcommittee separately? And then rehash that all again in a public hearing. That puts yes, we just heard in the presentation, the budget team is all salaried employees and we're not in any danger of costing overtime, but we are in danger of them losing sleep.
The budget team, by the way, has said that they're more than willing and had anticipated meeting with the subcommittees.
Again, all I'm saying, the motion that I made was that we combine the subcommittee and the public hearing, because it's gonna be, the subcommittee's gonna meet, we're gonna come up with this questions, we're gonna get answers, we're gonna give our spiel on the budget as it's presented. The subcommittee agrees, the subcommittee talked about this, whatever. And then I guarantee you, not to cast aspersions on Mr. Guerin, but he will ask a question in a public hearing that we had asked in a subcommittee meeting.
Well, hopefully first he's going to ask it of the subcommittee while we're at the
They never
public
do.
hearing.
We've never done that.
I
Harken back
differ.
to every
I
meeting
understand
that
what
we've
you're
ever
saying.
had, it hasn't
The committee will always ask its questions, but I believe that the process does scale down the level of questioning, because the information that they garner is important and it's disseminated to the committee. John and then Steve.
Yeah, I guess...
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Roberta, then John, then Steve. My apologies.
Forgotten, but not gone. I have rethought the vote also, and my understanding right now is that, picking up on Mrs. Coburn's idea about having subcommittees, whether they be reconstituted subcommittees or the same ones that we always had. The subcommittee would meet with the budget team ask all the questions. If they wanted to break down the salary line, find out this salary, that salary, or whatever it happened to be. And that would be, and your budget team is in agreement with doing something like that through you, Mr. Hill, to Mr. Kelly. Is the budget team willing to meet with the subcommittees? All right.
Well, the town manager has told me that.
Told you that, all right.
Yeah.
So that allows an in-depth study of those particular budgets that would be under those subcommittees. Then the regular process continues. You're not going to, if we vote, I voted in favor of the motion that Mr. Delinsky did put forward. But in rethinking it, if you have the entire public audience out there and you're doing this in-depth study of the subcommittee, and then you have to allow for the public hearing, you can't stop the public hearing until the very last person who wants to ask a question on that has spoken. So you could be on one subcommittee for 4 hours or 3 hours. So in the economy for time, I think to go back to the idea of having subcommittees meet with the budget team. The subcommittee reports to the main committee, we have the public hearings. That's what I would suggest as a combination or a blending of ideas here between what Mrs. Coburn has been speaking about and what Mr. Delinsky talked about. You combine them both, you can't cut off a public hearing. The last man standing can speak.
Well, that's why I think the public hearings would now not be 2 or 3 nights, they would be 6 or 8 nights.
Yeah.
Who had the hand up over here?
He was first.
Yeah.
Who? John? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I've been thinking about it too, and now I'm more in Bruce's corner. I mean, I just don't see the point of meeting with the budget team like numerous times. Everybody will be meeting with the same group of people. It's not like you'll be getting different perspectives. So I guess I'd rather just do it at the public hearing, since everybody's meeting with the same group of people. You're not getting a department perspective. So I don't see the point of subcommittees.
Wait a minute. I'm sorry, we got to go in order, Pat. And Steve?
I believe we should go back to the subcommittees, and I believe the department head should be there. Some of these departments probably aren't even changed. They can certainly all, department head should be able to answer 90% of our questions. It's ridiculous to think that they can't answer any questions. They've been answering questions their entire job, so.
Okay, but you've heard why they circumvented that process this year, because the department heads didn't know about their departments. Was a problem.
Right, but they've always answered questions before. I mean, some of the departments have changed some and some haven't, but they want the department heads to learn how to do it. So the best thing for everybody would have the department heads there, and they want that, you want to have that committee there, fine. Everybody will be learning, so I think it's a good
I'm sure that we
idea.
can ask the department heads to be here, so if there's something they can't answer, then the department heads certainly, I'm sure, will be able to weigh in if we ask them to. But they didn't build these budgets, so I'm not sure how much they're going to be able to tell us. I understand what you're saying.
It's a learning experience for everybody.
Who else? Pat, I'm sorry, go
I
ahead.
just don't understand how we vote if we don't have the subcommittees, and that's where I need someone to enlighten me from the other side of the argument. At least, whether it was flawed or not, you had a subcommittee give a recommendation, yes, and sometimes the subcommittee's recommendation didn't get accepted, but you still had a subcommittee chair making a recommendation for what we were going to vote on. Are we just going to have 14 individual people? Is it going to be like it used to be, where whoever gets recognized first says, I make a motion for X, and that's the one that goes through? I just can't get my head around how the voting process would work if we didn't have subcommittee recommendations.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay. We've had a motion and a second. I'd like to see a show of hands on this vote. So all in favor of, and make sure I got this correctly, of reconsidering this article. Could you say that again louder?
To reconsider the motion of last meeting regarding combining the subcommittees and the public hearings into one meeting.
Motion second. We've had discussion. All those in favor, please raise their hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All those opposed? 1, 2, 3, 8. The vote is 9-3. Do I have a substitute, a different motion that somebody wants to make about the subcommittees? Or by abandoning that motion, we just automatically are defaulting back to subcommittees, is I guess what we're doing.
That's correct.
Okay.
What was Peter's original motion?
Go back to the subcommittees.
Yeah, but Peter required in his motion that the department heads be there and answer for the budget, and they can't. And that's why it failed.
I still think they should be there, even if somebody else is there.
I cannot require that. I can ask for that to be done, but if we want to speak to the departments, I can require that. But I can't require them to present a budget that they don't know about.
Well, like you say, if the finance committee team is coming, then certainly a department that should be here, I think.
Okay. Chief?
What harm would there be in having the department heads here?
None.
None?
No.
Mr. Kelly?
That would have to be a question to the town manager, and it would have to be whether he decided he wanted them there or not.
Okay, there's your answer.
Want me to call him back? Hurry up.
I'll actually ask that question tomorrow for the committee. Jim?
So I guess the motion should be that we form the subcommittees, and the subcommittees meet with the budget committee, the town budget committee.
Well, actually, I don't think
individually.
I don't think we need a motion, because by rescinding last meeting's vote, we're just going to now default back to the subcommittee process we've always had, which makes sense. All right. All right, other business, just to wrap up as quickly as we can. The warrant articles were distributed, so you can take a look at those. The Rules Committee met, excuse me, and have voted their recommendations for the standing committees to be to reviewing the articles.
I'm sorry, I just have a question about the warrant articles. I just noticed that a bunch of them are combined now that were never combined in the past. And I just want to make sure I understand this. Because some of them don't say or any other action relative thereto, we are accepting all or nothing. I just want to make sure I understand that. On those articles that don't have that clause, it's all or nothing. So if I don't want the lawnmower, I got to throw out the entire $2 million.
Wow. Why the hell would we do that?
I think it's a one-word answer.
No, actually, she's not, because these were proposed by the Board of Selectmen, so it's not a moderator question, it's a Board of Selectmen question.
No, but the question about.
Oh, the language in there
how
about
we going
other
to do this?
relative thereto, yeah.
All right, now, there are a couple of schools of thought on that.
Okay, I just want to remind you, it's 9:30.
Okay.
So can we
Is it a
get
yes or
get
no?
to this quickly?
No.
Please.
When it comes to using the authorization to modify, which is that statement, or take any other action relative thereto, it is more particular in one respect to things like bylaws and zoning things, because zoning issues, zoning bylaws, even regular bylaws. And generally, if something is a very small change in the bylaw.
For the purchase, like a $2 million purchase.
No, I'm talking now a bylaw, just
Right, but I'm
a
asking about
bylaw.
purchases.
Well, because there's two different issues here. Is sometimes it's either you're going to vote something, as you just did now, up or down, because you have to do something. And if you're being asked to make a change in what has been presented in something like a bylaw, in just a short change in the bylaw, the question is how much latitude is in that authorization. If it says something in a numerical thing. In other words, a dollar amount. Generally, now I'm talking now on purchasing or acquisition. Generally, it means that you can appropriate no more than the dollar amount. Now, that's one practice that says when you don't have that authorization, it just says you're asking to vote, but you can't change that number upward, and you can change it downward or not vote for it at all. Now, I am going to be seeking other advice on that because I've asked the questions of the town manager and the Board of Selectmen on the different articles that they put in without the authorization to modify. Now, when it comes to the capital articles, the capital formula articles, I am going to, and I've laid out these sheets, which you will get one copy of anyways, under the capital outlay general fund. That will be treated the same way as we're doing the community preservation projects. There will be a separate vote taken under each one of those categories. But my ruling will be that you cannot increase any one of those numbers. If you want to reduce it, you can reduce it. It'll be a separate vote taken, just as if we had 8 articles. And I happen to be one of the people who advocated this kind of presentation.
So let me just quickly summarize. If there's one article that has 10 items in that article, you're going to hold an individual vote on each 10 items, not the bottom line of that one article.
Right, because first of all, that's totally unfair to you as a town meeting member.
Well, it really depends on how the motions are structured from this committee.
Right.
So we can address that through our motions.
That's correct. But what if, for example, I'm looking at let's say the police, and somebody realizes that maybe that should be $280,000. I would say you can't do that. You can make it less, or even say you don't even want the money in it. By taking a separate vote, it allows you the same discussion that you had when we had 8 different articles. The reason is very justified, and I do support this, and I've advocated this for years, surprisingly, is when we've been asking for capital outlay programs, we have not received them as a unit. And we've ended up, I shouldn't have to tell you, you become the people who are trying to do the capital outlay program. The town manager did explain these are in part of recommendations for a capital outlay, a bigger program. I haven't seen that, but the fact is, by taking this approach, at least we're looking at all those things that have to be considered in somebody's view as necessary things for these various departments to operate. It's really it's just putting it all together. And the fact that still some of these things are also grouped by the necessary requirements for what you state in the borrowing. I'm also seeking samples of how similar towns have done this approach.
Okay, so we understand that you've got some interpretation of this, and there might be some leeway and latitude sans the original language of, or any other actions relative there too.
And it's essentially the same way as we've been doing for the community preservation projects. That way, Of course, they have some other different limitations, but the idea of having a separate vote on these categories, you'll at least be able to see the whole scope of what you're doing together.
Okay.
So that's, it may end up, you might have a lot of discussion, but very little worrying of what you're doing on the floor.
All right, thank you, Mr. Moderator. Any other questions? Okay.
I want to clarify something in my head here. Like on page 12, Article 28, ID 28 Water Capital. I remember what Jamie said. They got $50,000 for water improvement, Gurney well upgrade, and it goes on and on. 100,000, 190. Grand total is 489,000. Now, I think if I interpret it right, he's saying if you reject one, like say Chevy Tahoe, no, where is it? Pratt's Court treatment for 100,000, then you're rejecting all the other pieces of equipment.
Reverse is
Then
true.
You vote on each one individually.
We can shrink the scale of the article, not expand it. So we couldn't add a second
That's what he
combo
said.
double.
But Jamie, I thought he said something different.
I
Gotta
think
vote
they did, but-
all of it. So who's right?
I'm going to go with the town manager, the town moderator at this point. Any other questions? Okay. Moving on. Now that we're going back to subcommittees, I will pull that task list together and get it to you by Friday. Okay, so we'll work on it tomorrow. I'll pass it around. I'll talk to committee chairs, make sure that folks are available for that work, and then we'll get the scheduled budget published. I'll email it, and then we'll get it in the mail as well, okay? We talked about the warrant articles. The Finance Committee updates. Just a quick note that we have new members. There's been a caucus in Precinct 5, and they've elected a replacement for Kathy Silva. There's also a new appointee from the moderator, and he'll be announcing that one as well, okay? Let me see. Minutes. Do I have a motion on the minutes from January 23rd? A motion to approve?
Second.
Second, okay. Roberta?
I just would like to have my last name spelled correctly.
That's unreasonable.
If that's okay.
Which page or where?
Huh?
I didn't. Roberta, where is it misspelled?
Through you. I'm out.
This little banter is out of order now,
No. No, it's my husband's name. He's
Oh, I know,
proud
no, I
of it.
don't
It's his
decide. I agree
family
with you
name.
there.
It should be spelled correctly.
please. Page, where?
It's in the listing of people. I spelled correctly, but every place else it's spelled incorrectly.
Okay.
And I'm sorry that it's just a little tiny thing,
It's
but
important. I don't disagree at all. So thanks for pointing that out.
thank you.
Well, you've got like 3 or 4 last names, don't you? Okay. I'm working with the engineering department. Oh, I'm sorry. Right, with the amendment. So we've got a motion and a second. We've got a change to update and correct Dr. Camacho's name. That said, can I have a vote? All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Any abstaining? Great.
Abstain.
Oh, Jim's abstaining and Bruce is abstaining.
Oh, me too, I wasn't there either.
Pat, because they weren't here. Okay. One of the reasons might be is because they weren't here. There might be other reasons, I'm not sure. And the last update is that I'm working with the engineering department to help us out with some support, and we'll have more updates on that. Our next item, our last item, is our next meeting. And quite honestly, with the business that we've got going on, I'd like to meet next week, if that works for everybody. Can I get a proposed date and time? Is Wednesday or Thursday better?
Wednesday.
Wednesday's better. Is 7 o'clock still good for everybody? Okay, so, I'm sorry? If it's, yeah, so Scott will plow us out if we get snowed in.
When's the next meeting?
Okay, so next Wednesday, 7 o'clock. We'll see about if this room's available, but the room will be TBD. All right. Having no other business before the board, can I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Motion, Peter, Bruce, second. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Thank you all very much.